Hello, my name is Maria Mankeldi, a legal advisor and academic researcher, and today I am going to explore the complex and controversial role of the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, during the Second World War. Was it a neutral intermediary in turbulent times, or did its operations indirectly support Nazi Germany? I will examine this intersection of financial neutrality, geopolitical tensions, and moral responsibility. Let's introduce the BIS. It was founded in 1930 in Basel to manage German reparations under the Young Plan. As the reparation system collapsed following the Great Depression, the BIS evolved into a hub for international monetary cooperation. By the late 1930s, it had become a key institution in the global financial system, facilitating dialogue and transactions among central banks. However, during the Second World War, it continued its operations and financial dealings with Nazi Germany, sparking significant controversy. This raises questions about the limits of neutrality in global finance and whether financial institutions can remain apolitical in times of systemic violence. To analyze the BIS's wartime role, we adopt a historical legal approach. First, we examine the bank's constitutive instruments, including the statutes and founding agreements, to understand its unique legal and institutional status. Next, we draw on archival materials, secondary historiography, and documentation from the Nuremberg trials to reconstruct wartime activities. We pay particular attention to key actors within the institution and specific financial operations, such as the transfer of Czechoslovak gold in 1939. Finally, we interpret these findings through a geopolitical lens, considering how financial interdependence interacts with power dynamics and ethical responsibility. Now let's talk about the legal and institutional nature of the BIS. The BIS is a hybrid institution, combining characteristics of an international organization and a private corporation. Though created through international agreements, it operated as a profit generating entity with shareholders and enjoying extensive legal immunities, including protection from taxation and state interference, even during times of war. This dual nature complicates questions of accountability. On the other hand, the BIS has a technocratic mandate to maintain financial stability. On the other, it operates in a highly politicized environment where neutrality alone may not be sufficient to prevent complicity. Originally focused on German reparations, the BIS had to reinvent itself after the Great Depression. It transitioned into a hub for international monetary cooperation and dialogue among central banks. By the late 1930s, the bank was firmly established as a key player in the global financial system, facilitating transactions, building trust, uh, and supporting international financial stability even as geopolitical tensions increased across Europe. Now let's talk about the neutrality during the Second World War. At the outbreak of the conflict, the BIS formally declared neutrality and continued operations without interruption. It maintained relationships with both Allied and Axis central banks, and representatives from countries at war still cooperated within its framework. This shows the persistence of financial interdependence even in the midst of total war and illustrates the challenges of applying strict neutrality when the world around the institution is in conflict. Highlighting several concepts here, for instance, governance and Nazi presence. Neutrality was complicated by the presence of individuals with strong links to the Nazi regime. Walter Frank, president of the German Reichsbank and later convicted at the Nuremberg trials, served on the BIS board. Emil Pool, involved in handling of looted assets, also held influential positions. These governance connections raise difficult questions. To what extent was the BIS embedded in the Nazi financial system? Could neutrality exist alongside the influence of individuals directly implicated in aggressive state politics? Also, we should talk about some financial operations during the war. Uh, Throughout the war, the BIS carried out financial transactions, including gold transfers and currency operations, maintaining links between Germany and the international monetary system. Although the bank operated under a neutral mandate, its actions contributed to sustaining the economic infrastructure of the Third Reich. In practice, neutrality was not neutral. It had tangible political and economic consequences, highlighting the risks of technocratic adherence to rules over moral judgment. Finally, it is important to highlight the Czechoslovak gold case of 1931. One of the most illustrative examples is the transfer of Czechoslovak gold of 1931. After Germany occupied Czechoslovakia, the Nazis ordered the transfer of the country's central bank reserves held abroad to the Reichsbank. Despite clear warnings that these instructions were coerced, the BIS authorized the transfer. This episode demonstrates how strict adherence to procedure can override ethical and political considerations, showing the practical limitations of a purely technical interpretation of neutrality. So now let's interpret the key findings. From these cases, it becomes evident that the BIS prioritized institutional continuity and adherence to financial orthodoxy over political or ethical judgments. Neutrality was understood as a strict compliance with rules rather than an assessment of the context or the consequences. As a result, the bank acted as a channel through which resources flowed to the Nazi Germany. Neutrality, in this context and in practice, effectively facilitated the operations of an aggressive regime. On the other hand, key findings that emerged from the analysis suggest that the BIS was not a passive intermediary. Its governance included individuals implicated in Nazi economic policies. Its financial operations indirectly supported the German war effort, and technocratic neutrality proved limited when applied in the context of systemic violence. This history underscores the tension between institutional rules and ethical responsibility. The BIS also has the BIS case also has broader lessons for global finance. Financial institutions can operate across geopolitical divides, even during war. Legal immunities and technocratic mandates may shield them from accountability, allowing financial systems to reinforce existing power asymmetries and enable state aggression indirectly. In this context, neutrality can become a mechanism that sustains rather than mitigates conflict, raising questions about the role of ethics in global financial governance. To conclude, the experience of the BIS during the Second World War challenges the assumption that financial institutions can remain apolitical. Neutrality, when applied without ethical consideration, risks complicity in unjust systems. This case highlights the need to rethink how global financial governance functions in times of crisis. Refusing to take a position or adhering strictly to technical rules can itself be a form of political engagement. Ultimately, this history reminds us that ethical vigilance is inseparable from financial neutrality. If institutions are to operate responsibly in a world marked by conflict and inequality. Thank you very much.